Alrighty, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are from. Thanks for joining our webinar, Accessibility for All, brought to you by Ablr and the Diversity Movement. I'm Kayla Kovac-Galton, the Curriculum and Project Strategist at the Diversity Movement, and I'll be handling the logistics for this event. This webinar will be facilitated by the Diversity Movement Senior Consultant, Florence Holland. A quick note before we begin. Conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially those that require us to be vulnerable, can also make us feel uncomfortable. We want to allow compassionate and critical dialogues that lead to personal exploration and growth. If we're not comfortable being uncomfortable in these conversations, we're not doing it right. Please note that a live transcription of the webinar can be enabled by clicking on the drop-down at the top of your screen next to Custom Live Streaming Service and selecting View Stream on Custom Live Streaming Service. If you're referencing this webinar on social media, please use the hashtags Ablr Allies, Ablr Launch, NDEAM, and Accessibility, and tag the Diversity Movement and Ablr on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Now I'm going to drop out of sight and let our hosts take it from here. Florence, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Kayla, and welcome to this webinar. We are excited to have you, and again, thank you for joining us today. I am thrilled to have such a diverse and yes, prestigious panel with me today for this very important conversation. In today's event, we look to talk about why businesses need to focus on accessibility and inclusion. Notice the and. Ways employees can make jobs employers can make jobs and workplaces more accessible. We're going to talk about the importance of digital accessibility, and our panelists are going to share their very own accessibility journeys. So we hope to leave some time, of course, at the end for your questions. So feel free to ask them throughout the webinar using our Q&A and chat features. I'm going to start by letting our panelists introduce themselves first. And so they're going to tell us their names, well, their names on the screen, and I'll say their names, but they can, of course, start with their names, where they're employed and what they do for those companies. And we're going to go from there. So John, you want to kick us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Florence. My name is John Samuel, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Ablr, which is a new digital accessibility and inclusion business. It's a joint venture between LCI and Walk West, and we're super excited about this. And I happen to be blind, and my journey in accessibility really started when I started to lose my sight, but I was ashamed and afraid to talk about it. And I went through most of my life without disclosing my disability. And then it was really coming to LCI when I really came out of the closet a blind person and embraced accessibility and my white cane. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Carrie?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Carrie Farber. I lead accessibility for Walmart eCommerce, and so excited to be here today and be a part of this conversation. Similar to John, I too am blind and also have a little bit of a similar journey in that it wasn't until about 4 years ago that I, quote, came out and shared that I was losing my vision. And so I went through, the majority of my career not using a white cane or a dog because I too was afraid of what people would think if they knew I had a disability. And so really stepping into the world of accessibility and inclusion has really become both a personal and a professional passion.
Thank you, Carrie, for being here today. Lori?
Hi, thanks, Florence. I'm Lori Samuels. I am the Accessibility Director for NBCUniversal. Not here in that official capacity today, but being at Comcast NBCUniversal has been a fantastic experience. I come out of the tech industry. Most of my career has been spent as a software engineer, engineering leader, been in technology for quite some time. I got interested in accessibility back in the 1990s before there was an internet. So I've been around for a while, and very passionate about driving for accessibility in technology and disability inclusion. My personal connection with disability is I grew up with a sister who has cerebral palsy. I have a daughter who's on the autism spectrum. And I'm excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Alan, you want to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Florence. Yeah, my name's Alan Hale. I am currently the autonomous vehicle connectivity domain lead at General Motors for the partnership with Cruise Automation for their autonomous vehicle. Previously, I was at Ford Motor Company working on their autonomous vehicle program as well in a similar capacity. In my community in Ferndale, Michigan, just north of Detroit, I also chair a commission on accessibility with our city government. It's called the Ferndale Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Commission, where we meet with different groups in the city to help shape our local policy. And just recently, through my engagement at General Motors, I got involved with their employee resource group on accessibility, GM Able, and I've taken a vice president role with them. So I'm helping bring my experience of accessibility and inclusion there. And maybe the most important part of my experience with disability is I'm an ally myself, and my wife has a spinal cord injury. She has a T6 injury and uses a manual wheelchair. So the realm of physical accessibility is kind of what boosted my activism, and I'm glad to be part of the accessibility community.
Well, thank you all. As I told you, see, we have definitely the right people on this webinar to help all of us to continue to learn more. So before we start though, we're gonna start with a quick poll. So Kayla, would you share our poll? We're just gonna take this poll. It is gonna be completely anonymous. So please feel free to answer honestly, not that you would do anything different. But the question is, has your company conducted a digital accessibility and inclusion audit of your website? And you have 3 options: yes, no, or I don't know. Okay, about another 30 seconds, allow you to click. All right, let's see the results, Kayla. So we have about 34% of you that says yes, we have 28% of you that says no, and 38% of you say, I have no clue. So we know that hopefully we will help all of those on this call. If you have done one, we're going to try to hopefully steer you into understanding if you've done it correctly. And if you have no clue, that you will prompt you to find out. And if no, for sure you know that you haven't, that again, that hopefully our conversation today will again prompt you to look into that. So we're going to start with our panel, because even from the moment I read about each of you and heard your stories, I have wanted to know the answer to these questions. So I am fully ready and excited, and I want to make sure we have time to hear of your wonderful experiences, but even more importantly, your expertise, so that you can help us on this journey of accessibility and inclusion. So I'm actually going to pose this first question to Carrie. What problems do people with disabilities encounter counter? Yes,
Florence,
I can
can
hear you
me?
now. Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Awesome. Thank you. So can you, sorry, the internet cut
Yes,
out. Could you repeat the
absolutely.
question?
What problems do you think people with disabilities are encountering in the workplace?
That's a great question. So I think that, people with disabilities encounter a variety of different challenges in the workplace. So again, depending on what the disability is, um, I think when it comes to accessibility for internal tools and technology, that would be one. I think there are opportunities in just the physical workspace. So I'll give you just a quick example. As technology evolves in both the physical space, for example, soda machines, right? The days of the vending machine are now the days of the touch screen vending machine or the touch screen soda fountain, right? And so are we thinking about people with mobility challenges that may not be able to reach that screen, or those who may be low vision or blind? So I think when it comes to workplace inclusion, there's the technology aspect, there's the physical aspect, and I think the last part is really helping to educate associates and employees in the workplace just about how to be inclusive, and how to think about people with different abilities when they're doing presentations, or just even being comfortable to ask someone, would you like assistance and whatnot. So I would say those are sort of the three key areas.
That's great. And my second part of the question, and even as I framed the question, made me think. Initially, it was, what can they, meaning the people with disabilities, particularly do to create inclusive workplaces? But I'll actually change that a little bit. Like, is it the responsibility of those with the people with disabilities to try to create inclusive environments, or is it the ownership on the company to want to create, or does it have to be a partnership? What are your thoughts, Lori? I see your head moving there.
Thoughts? Well, I just speaking to that just a little bit. I mean, again, it is definitely a we, not a us or them kind of conversation. I think one of the things that's most important for companies to do, and it's such a simple thing to do, is to simply ask people who are interviewing for a position if they require or would like an accommodation for the interview itself. That's a best practice that I saw when I was at Microsoft, which I think is just a fantastic model to use across the board. It's a simple thing, but it's a welcoming message, because I think people with disabilities, knowing Carrie and John, I think can speak to this more directly, but may struggle with disclosure. They may struggle with the question of should I say anything? Remembering that 70% of disabilities are invisible. So we kind of classically think of someone in a wheelchair with a disability, but in reality, we just don't know. And in order to be welcoming, we really need to ask if an accommodation would be helpful for the interview itself. That's the right tone, inclusive message to set going, just from the beginning.
Yeah.
Awesome. That kind of goes into one of the next questions around, for businesses, what are the challenges? So you talked about one in terms of self-identification or self-disclosure in terms of employees, but what other challenges might businesses be facing when trying to provide that inclusive work environment? And how could they overcome them? So one, again, Laura, you suggest possibly in the interview process, asking then in terms of accommodations. Do you have, John, any other suggestions or challenges and ways that businesses can try to approach those in an efficient and effective way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things right now. I mean, I think like Lori said, it's a we, right? And it's coming together and having those open discussions, first getting people to disclose and talk about the needs. And I think that a lot of organizations just have a misconception about the cost of accommodations. They think, oh, having accommodation for somebody with a disability is going to cost a lot of money. Oh, so I mean, maybe we won't go that route, right? I think it's some of these misconceptions that are out there that organizations just need to be educated on what that cost is, because it's nominal. In many cases, very nominal. And also when you make those accommodations, you're going to actually improve the experience for everybody in that organization. So somebody who may have a temporary disability with a broken leg may benefit from, automatic doors, right? So these type of things that it's just the misconceptions that are out there, but having more of those discussions as a we rather than a us and them, I think that's what's going to change it.
Awesome. Alan, I know you talked about a bit an employee resource group, for instance. Can you tell us a little bit about that and possibly how that as well can help businesses get an understanding of things they can do to be more inclusive?
Yeah, certainly. That's as the other speakers were talking about their different challenges. I think a common phrase in the disability rights community is "nothing about us without us," and the easiest way you can get that input is by really fostering a culture around an employee resource group where anyone with disability has a voice. And I think the role of an ally is to amplify those voices within the ERG and bring them into discussions. I know at General Motors, we've got a great, it's called the Disability Advisory Council, and it's a group of all of our senior leaders that meet once a quarter to really sit down with the ERG and anyone else in the company working on accessible efforts. And it's a great way to get these things to the forefront. And I think as we're talking about businesses adjusting their workplaces to be accessible, coronavirus has meant a lot of new changes coming all at once. So making sure that you include the voices of your ERG or people with disabilities is more important than ever.
Yeah,
Thank
couldn't agree
you.
more. Yeah.
And that goes in then to the next question in terms of, yes, the pandemic, I guess that's the official term. And of course, it has changed the work environment for all of us, right? The truly an inclusive process that no one was not affected, right? Around how they do business and how their employees will engage with their company. So with that though, then John, when we think about it's changing and particularly like in virtual settings, right? The Zooms, the Google Meets, the conference calls, the emails, like all of those things. How are you seeing even then businesses showing that we're going to be accessible and inclusive to all during this new virtual work environment that we're in?
Yeah, no, it's been really interesting. I mean, right when this all the changes started happening, I wrote something saying, "Oh, this is the silver lining of the pandemic is that we're actually going to be able to do jobs at home that people said we couldn't do before, right? We now figured out how to make every job, kind of these service-based jobs, all being able to done at home, and that was great. It took away that transportation because, I'd like Alan to actually talk about that kind of the impact of transportation a little bit later on, but you know what we're seeing is now companies using all these virtual platforms. And I know that when, different platforms are more accessible for me, and it's been good because I've been able to explain to people like, hey guys, this one just isn't the right platform for me. And it has been able to talk about that discussion a little bit more that we couldn't do before. I think these virtual events like this, we're now being able to look, we're bringing a whole panel of people from all over the country. And we're showing that this is a national issue rather than just a local issue. And I think there's really good stuff about it. But I think again, we are being able to talk a little bit more about it, and we're able to show challenges that we're facing because everyone now is facing some challenges, and they're more empathetic about those challenges.
Absolutely. And I think even, when we had a pre-call with you, I mean, you gave us some very specific things, right, that people can do, even just this with Zoom, that yes, there is, the ability for live streaming services, right? Or closed captioning in meetings, or providing a transcription of the meeting after or before, materials beforehand. So I think there are some very specific things that we can do, and we'll reference some of those resources at the end for sure, that there, as I call them, quick wins that you can do if you have no idea of even where to start. But to Lori's part, just making an effort in some what would some people say simple ways are not even simple ways. They actually will go a very long way to do that. And so I'll go to Lori in terms of with the technology, right? It's a great tool. So to your point, you've been in the space for a while. Technology has done amazing things for our world and the work that a lot of us do, but there also can be a gap, right, between the technology, who's creating the technology, for who the user is. So what do you think we can do around closing that gap in regards to those that are working on the technology versus those who are assessing or accessing the technology that we're using?
Yeah, great question. So I'm fundamentally optimistic about the role of technology in accessibility, and I say that because although the challenge is that every time there's an advance in technology, there's another challenge in terms of being inclusive. So whether it's now we're kind of getting into the era of artificial intelligence, and we're getting into AR and VR kind of new technologies. Well, the way to make technology inclusive is to design it to be inclusive. And so it starts right at the beginning of product development. It starts during design. And so thinking about disability, because different disabilities require different needs. So to your point about video conferencing platforms like Zoom or Teams, I'm a bit of a Microsoft fangirl, so I'll make a plug for Teams, even though we're on a Zoom call, which is that, the live captions are built in. There's technology now with speech recognition, which, although not perfect, is definitely going to continue to advance. So we'll see advancement there. The important thing, I think, is, again, during the design process on new technologies, is to make sure that the voice of disability is there, absolutely integrated and central to the design process, because that's how we can create inclusive technology products. If we don't do that, then we're going to, if you don't intentionally include, then you're going to unintentionally exclude. And we've had too much of that. There's just far too much of that, and we still do. So it's absolutely critical for people with disabilities to participate in user research, in UX design. And again, I think part of that is what we're talking about in October, National Disability Employment Awareness Month, which is get people with disabilities working in your company so that they can participate in the design and creation process. So there's my plug for NDA.
Awesome. Alan, you want to share? Because I know a lot of what you're doing is around technology too. So
yeah, Lori.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lori, as soon as you were talking about making sure we include people in design, that really rang true. And for things like automotive engineering, I see there are kind of what I would consider like 4 main layers, where it's kind of research, design, engineering, and then operations. And if you're not employing people with disabilities in all of those levels, you're not going to have a perfect solution come out. So I can't stress that enough, how important it is to include people with disabilities, not just as consultants, not just bring them in for feedback. They need to be the ones empowered to be creating these things and see it from start to finish.
Awesome. So Carrie, in the same token, and of course my phone, I don't know why my phone would ring. That's how it works, right? What would you say, Carrie, then we want to bring them in the process, but we also don't want to make it appear like we're patronizing or calling attention, like you're only here because of this, right? So what, again, when we talk about allies and allyships and companies that are truly seeking these inclusive environments, what are ways that we can offer assistance, invite to the table, provide, resources, again, without appearing patronizing, and kind of seeing it as we're only seeking purely for this. Do you have suggestions for ways that companies can engage, or how even your own company has engaged you throughout your personal journey?
Yeah, so, the CMO of Microsoft said once, and I don't know that this is probably been said by many folks, but it's really important to design with people with disabilities, like alongside them, rather than for them. And so, like the other panelists have mentioned, it's so important to hire people with disabilities, because integrating them into the team not only brings just a wealth of thought perspective and thought leadership and diversity, it's actually, it speaks volumes in terms of just the diversity of the workplace. And again, to your point, this is not about going out and saying, oh, we have to talk to someone about this. It's really about shifting culture. I always say, like, accessibility isn't a box we check, but rather a shift in the way that we work and an evolution of culture. And so, bringing people in who can, share their perspectives and their ideas and be, just as Alan mentioned, at every step of the way, right? So business requirements, design, development, testing, I think is really the way to go. And it's really just valuing, another member of the team.
So, John, you obviously talked about a little bit that you kicked off, right? Ablr and Ablr 360 in terms of the website. So the goal for that, do you want to talk and give an inkling, and then how then, yes, those resources will help companies do some of the things that we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what the panel has just talked about shifting and changing culture, and that's exactly what Ablr is there to do. I think it's getting the conversations, actually using people with disabilities in the testing process, in the guidance perspective. It's more we can get people with disabilities at the seat at the table, talking about the issues, explaining to it. I think that's how we're going to shift the culture. And I'll say, I mean, this was a joint venture. We became two companies coming together to build a website with all the best intentions and everything in it. And we actually we saw the challenges as we were building it, that the inclusive language, the accessibility, nobody, with all the best intentions, we saw issues and we had to go and fix them. And that's what we want to go and make sure. If we have challenges doing this, we know that other people out there are going to be doing or having the same issues and may not even notice. And that's what we want to do at Ablr, is go out and help people to really kind of shift their culture and make sure that accessibility and inclusion are just part of their just the culture, what they do every day. And no, I'm super excited about it. And working with Walk West and was just an amazing opportunity, because Walk West was one of those organizations. When I heard Donald Thompson, the CEO, speak at a tech conference over a year and a half ago, he was the only person talking about diversity and inclusion at a tech conference. And he showed the case for business. This is a business case. This is a case that every company needs to be thinking about it. And I'm just glad that we're able to come together and do something great together.
Awesome. So can you drop a couple of strategies or tools for our audience to kind of, rope them in a little bit in terms of how to make their online presence inclusive and functional for all? So what are some tools, some strategies, particularly in the online presence, can businesses be doing? Yeah,
first, ask your team, ask people on your team, because the disability community, we make up roughly 20+%. There's somebody in your organization with a disability. Whether you know it or not, there's somebody with a disability. Have people in your own organization go through and share their experiences. And so that's the first thing. Ask people, go through it. And if you don't know of anyone on your team who uses assistive technology or knows anything about accessibility, reach out to Ablr or reach out to another organization and have people, make sure that people with disabilities are part of the testing process. Have them go through your digital content. And then, one of the main things I would think about is, like, you need to have an accessibility statement, policy. And that may be the first thing. Go out and check and have a policy statement saying, hey, we're committed to this, and this is what we want to do. And so I think that's the first step. And there's lots of tools out there that you can use, automated tools, but they only catch 25 to 40%. But there's some ones you can use just as a quick litmus test. But again, it really takes actually humans to go through to really make sure that's accessible for everyone.
So we keep talking about this human element, right? And so we're saying, get them on our team and, create. So to me, and what I specialize in, and that means that we have to have a pipeline of people who are ready and able to do what we need them to do for our job, but yet maybe in this community. So what types of partnerships are some of your companies already building, or things that you work for? For instance, Lori, I know that you're involved with Deaf Kids Code. I mean, so what are some things and partnerships that companies should, as I call it, be working smarter, not harder, to develop, so that they're truly building a pipeline of individuals ready to work in their organizations?
Yeah, great question. I think that's such a critical point, because first of all, if we're always looking in the same places for talent, we'll only find the certain kinds of talent, and we won't actually create diverse cultures and across the board, right? So it's really important to look at other sources of talent. And one other quick thing I wanted to say, just building on some things that the other panelists mentioned, hiring people with disabilities is good for business. And I think sometimes in this, I will raise the uncomfortable point that sometimes companies, I think they feel like they're getting some righteousness points for hiring people with disabilities. I think there's a sense of like, aren't we good people because we're hiring people with disabilities, or something along those lines, almost a slightly charitable kind of tone to it. But that's just silly, because people with disabilities are problem solvers. They are creative. They are natural innovators and drivers of innovation, the original hackers, et cetera, which means that if your company needs creative talent, if your company needs problem solvers, if your company cares about innovation, you should be tapping into this community to get your talent. So I think that's a really important point. So, and how I would say in terms of partnerships, absolutely critical. Nonprofit partnerships between, industry and nonprofit partnerships is so key. And that's really why I got involved with John at LCI Tech and all the work that they're doing there. It's very important to kind of look at, and Deaf Kids Code is just one example, fantastic one, of where we're going into the young communities of kids with disability in high school and middle school, and exposing them to the possibilities of a career in STEM. And I think corporations have a responsibility to make sure that they're addressing the technology gaps and making sure that they're being inclusive in that training process. So Microsoft, Google, Amazon are all doing work in that space, which is fantastic to see, but we can use a lot more of it to kind of close that skills gap.
Any other partnerships that you think people can form outside of not only necessarily Deaf Kids Code, but any others? I'm always looking for working smarter. So there are already some partnerships that are achieving your goals. I'll open that question to any other panelists.
I can speak to GM's partnership with Cruise, where Cruise has worked with several partners in the Bay Area where they're based for feedback and input into their autonomous vehicle. They've partnered with the National Federation for the Blind, the American Council for the Blind, and the Lighthouse for the Blind have all partnered with them in some degree for input. So that work is being done, and I think it's more important than ever for the future of autonomous vehicles.
Absolutely. So it sounds like, again, you in the same place, same Lori, when we talk about pipeline building. And again, when we talk about diversity, we always typically go straight to race. So we're talking about all dimensions of diversity. So when you're building a diverse pipeline, that means of all dimensions. And of course, we know there's intersectionality amongst all of those, but you will go and you will build relationships. So yes, look in your communities, see what work is already being done, build relationships with those. Obviously, every K-12 into college sector has some office of accessibility that you possibly could send information to. And again, develop a relationship to let even those individuals know, even if they don't come to be employed there, what services or what products you may offer in the space. So definitely, look at our educational institutions and the work that they're already doing in the space to continue to build that pipeline. Again, it's a relationship partnership. and not just the pick and pluck that should be being developed if you're truly building a pipeline. So thank you so much for sharing those specific things. Now, again, remember that you can post in our chat, definitely, or Q&A if you have a question that you want to answer, because of course I have questions all day, but I want to be sure that you get out of this session what you want to get out of it. And so I know for sure someone said work with your supplier diversity team as well. Very good, to source from disabled owned business owners as well. That's an excellent point in terms of the vendors that we use as well. Thank you so much for sharing that. But definitely as well, if there are any questions, post those in the chat for sure.
Yeah, on Florence, on that point, I'd say, there are some, I'll point out SAS has done a great job with their disability-owned business enterprise, sourcing and companies like, just really think about diversity and suppliership as one of those big places, because there's a lot of people out there who are entrepreneurs who have disabilities, and they're trying to, create a career that way, because a lot of people aren't getting jobs with major corporations, and so they've gone on their own. They've taken that problem-solving skill and started their own corporation. So supporting those disability-owned business enterprises is also another great way.
Awesome. So there's a question in the chat, and it was actually the same question I was going to, so we're thinking alike. And that goes back to Carrie. In the beginning, you kind of talked about possibly some problems, and you layered those challenges, right, around tools or technology, around physical workplace, but then also education. Right? And that's us educating those within as well, the workplace. So are there any leading practices that any of you want to share around how we making employee training available to those that are on site and will be, creating ideally inclusive environments? Is there any training or education or themes that we should be focused on as we talk about that education component of educating our workforces?
Yeah, so this is Carrie. I think that there are many approaches that companies can take. I think what's really key is getting the awareness and I'll even say like a snippet of education built into new hire orientation. So when we think about, someone starting their role, their very first day at your company, do they, see a video, or is there a speaker, or is there a module that they engage required annual learning modules around diversity? I just took one last week, and there was definitely questions around, accessibility and ADA, and just the importance of inclusion in the company's policies for everyone. And then I would say lastly, personally, I find it really important to make it fun and safe. So we do some immersive exercises and training, in a discovery lab. We do, some kind of dining experiences where we talk about, different kind of, we'll have folks go through experiences, to step into the shoes of someone with a disability. And we make it educational and fun, but in an environment where people feel like they can be themselves and they can ask any question. And I think that's key because, you all mentioned at the beginning, like, we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so the more we can get people to ask questions and really learn, I find the better we are in actually making change and driving action.
There was, I just wanted to add one thing, Florence. You all hear me, it's okay. I'm starting to feel and see now that accessibility can be a real driver also in the conversation around DEI and disability inclusion. So you can't achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion without disability inclusion. It is actually the largest strand of diversity, largest minority. So it's essential. It's not optional for companies to lean into disability inclusion. You also can't achieve disability inclusion without accessibility. So it goes both ways. People who work in accessibility like myself can start to drive conversation and around inclusion. We can partner with our DEI practitioners. We can engage and grow and strengthen and create more robust disability-focused employee resource groups. So I think there's really an opportunity for us to partner together in a way that perhaps we haven't before, because accessibility is sometimes perceived as just sort of in a compliance corner, and that's not really what it's about at all.
On that point, Lori, I think one of the things I've been speaking about is changing the acronym of DEI to IDEA, IDEA, right? With accessibility, so inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. You know, you need that, right? I mean, you need all four of those to actually make people feel like they belong. And then, and that's what's really caused me from an Ablr perspective, actually. I mean, we realize that we want, and as we talk about, Disability Employment Awareness Month, we really wanted to make sure, companies are, welcoming, and we want to make sure that people with disabilities feel like they belong. They're hiring people, they're inclusive. But what we also have to make sure is that the workforce is ready as well. And so educating and training the workforce, getting them ready. And Ablr, we're going to be partnering with Lighthouse San Francisco, who has an employee immersion program where they've had, people who've gone through their program have had a 43% success rate of getting jobs right afterwards. And that's great. I mean, when we think about what the unemployment rate is in the blind community and the disability community in general. So there's organizations like that. And we see that as a way we're building out a boot camp for a firm out here in Research Triangle Park, where we're going to be using that immersion program that Lighthouse San Francisco has done. We're now building out a kind of a boot camp model for a call center, and then providing an opportunity for students and just people in general to go through that boot camp so that they will be prepared with the soft skills and hard skills that they need to be successful when they apply for a job, and be really looked as a really like a great candidate and not just a token candidate. So there's a lot of great programs out there, and I think we're now seeing that innovation coming around because people are seeing, and companies, are seeing the benefits of actually, like Lori said, hiring people from the largest, underrepresented group in the world, and seeing that is going to be a big part of our culture moving forward.
That's great. And so Alan, earlier you talked about, and you mentioned the word ally, right? So while we have these programs that we're building to make sure that we're preparing people with disabilities to be ready for that workforce, but we also know then there are workforces, well, again, they may say they don't have, but as John said earlier, you have it, whether they're telling you or not. But let's talk about what does it mean to be an ally in this space, right? I mean, what are you seeing? What are you teaching possibly to show others that are like, what do I do? What do I say? How do I support? How do I call it out? Like, what can we do to become stronger allies in this space, in this work, to help our organizations and to help those that are there that may be just looking for someone to speak up on their behalf so that they know that is an environment that's inclusive?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one I know, trying to filter through all the stories I've got that I could use. One really comes to mind of when I was at Ford Motor Company, and I was involved with their FIDA ERG, that's their accessibility ERG. And I was in an office building where there was one man who was, he had quadriplegia and used a power chair, and he had kind of a big space in a corner. And I noticed just like day to day, like nobody really said hi to him. A lot of people averted their eyes or would go the other way. I even heard coworkers at one point were kind of saying like, oh, that guy's in the bathroom and he's been in there forever and we can't use it. and I corrected them first and foremost. I said, well, you don't know his needs. You need to be respectful of that. And then I noticed in working with the ERG, he wasn't participating, so I wasn't sure if he was even aware of it. So I had conversations with him about it, and we became fast friends. And he was a member, but had kind of stopped attending for a while because he didn't know what they were up to and just kind of drifted away. And then he became re-involved, and he led to some massive, amazing changes at Ford Motor Company, where they implemented accessible transit between buildings and fixed several entrances to different places. And now he has a role in shaping their campus transformation. So I think that's really like the core of being an ally. Is I think just one, educating yourself continuously, know kind of what the current what activism and disability rights looks like, and then really amplifying the voices of people with disabilities around you and making sure that they're comfortable in finding kind of their power.
Awesome. Carrie, do you have suggestions for us? You know, how can we be better allies in this space if we want to step into that role? What could we do to support in the work environment?
Yeah, I think there's two things. So like from a work perspective, I always like say to people, no matter what role you're in, you know, even if you're like, wow, I work on finance spreadsheets, or there, you know, accessibility doesn't really touch my job. It does. And like the thing to do is to really expand the way you think about your customer, and your customer may be an internal associate, right? So whoever you're, you know, developing, designing, you know, creating a spreadsheet for, or whoever may use your, you know, product or engage with your experience, think about people with disabilities, right? Like just, you know, expand sort of your perspective. And then I think the second part, in terms of being an ally, you know, Alan really did a wonderful job of explaining it, but don't be afraid to ask questions or ask someone, you know, if you know, if they need help, or if you, you know, have that sort of uncomfortable question. And I'll tell a quick story, you know, as well. You know, after one of our immersive experiences, I had a gentleman come up to me and say, you know, I once saw an individual, you know, at the street corner, and they, you know, had a disability, and they looked like they might be struggling, and I wanted to help, but I didn't know how, and I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I didn't know if it would offend them if I asked them help. So as a result, I did nothing and I walked away. And this person said, I'm really like embarrassed to say this, but you know, what do I do, and how do I not say the wrong thing? And I said, you know, thank you for sharing. The first thing to note is just simply ask someone, like, hey, is there something I could do to help, you know, help, or would you like some assistance? And if the person says yes, just simply ask, how can I best assist you? You know, like, don't assume that, you know, if the individual appears to be blind, that, you take their arm or whatnot, but just ask. So I would say, like, again, two things: expand the way you look at the people, you know, expand the way you perceive the people you serve. And then don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to approach someone. Like the gentleman Alan mentioned, right? Who people seem to be uncomfortable. Don't be afraid to go up and say, hello, how are you? Would you like to have coffee? If you see someone who, you know, may look like they dropped something and they're having a hard time finding it because they're blind, just simply say, you know, can I help? So those are, that would be my kind of advice.
And those are, it's so, to Lori and I think John's point, you know, what we're talking about, obviously this webinar was focused on people with disabilities and on accessibility, but all of those same things are important across any dimension of diversity, right? One, expand what you're thinking, right? Instead of having a narrow view, right? And I love how you put it, Carrie, not only, you know, external product, but everything that you're doing as an employee impacts someone else's job. So thinking about, how am I doing this, and whomever I'm giving this to next, or who will read this next or engage with this next, have I made it the most inclusive, right? So 1, 2, we all can do better in the workplace, and even in this virtual environment. I know it's harder, but when have you just reached out to someone that you work with to say hello lately, right? And not the what I call typical Zoom talk, right? So what's the weather like? Like, we get it. Like, we're also all able to go to weather.com in some manner. We can all figure out the weather. We don't have to ask that question anymore. Ask the next question, right? The more deeper, no, really, how are you? How are your kids? Oh, I know your kids at home, right? Asking and getting to know people. And then to your point, Carrie, to be inquisitive from the standpoint of just asking people, what can I do? What can I do to help you? And that's in any way to help make your job, more feasible today, or flexible today, or accessible today. And that's for any dimension of diversity, but even more in this space, just being open to having that. So I thank you for those ally moments and questions. So we have just a few more minutes before I wrap up. So I like to always go around like round robin. So if you just have one last thing to tell the people that are on our call, right? When we're talking about accessibility, we're talking about inclusive, we're talking about online presence, we're talking about technology, we're talking about how to be a better ally. We talked about all of these things. But if you had one last thing you wanted them to walk away with that either we already touched about, or that, Florence, you didn't ever ask me this question, so I'm going to talk about it now. What would you share with them if they had the main takeaway that in this space, when we talk about accessibility, what would you want them to walk away from to make sure that we're all making sure that we have truly inclusive environment? So I'm going to start, I have my, as I call it, my Brady Bunch screen. So I'm going to start on my right. And so that means I'm going to start with Alan. So what would you want us to leave with today, Alan?
I would say to anyone watching, I think taking time to maybe put some thought into action based on your interests. You joined this webinar because you're interested in accessibility and in the rights of people with disabilities. And I think the easiest way to really exercise that is by doing something to contribute to it. It's as simple as you can add alt text to your next Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram post. You can ask your communications team to get a quote for live captions for their video conference service, or even in your own backyard in your community. A lot of businesses right now are adjusting their formats for coronavirus. You can tell them that they can't put their high top patio tables out on the curb. It's as simple as just kind of being aware, paying attention, and speaking up if you see something that you think could be improved.
Thank you. Lori?
Hard to pick one thing, but I would say it's fear and ignorance are the enemies of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's really important to confront and understand your own unconscious biases, our own unconscious biases around disability or race or any other dimension. So be honest about that, be authentic about that. And at the same time, try to lean into disability and inclusion to recognize that, first of all, there's tremendous talent, there's tremendous creativity and just talent that we can tap into as employers. And it doesn't take much to just keep that little bit of accessibility in front of us. If you can use the accessibility checker in a Word document or in sending an email, just those little practices, it's a practice. So just get better at it with just small steps, and we can create a more accessible and inclusive world that way.
Awesome. Carrie?
Yeah, so I would say accessibility is an and, not an or. Many years ago, when we were very much at the beginning of the journey, I had a designer say, okay, I can make this really cutting edge. I can make this so cool. And we could like win some innovation awards, or I can make it accessible. And I would just encourage everyone to say, to know that it's an and, right? Making it inclusive, making it innovative, making it accessible, like is what's gonna help you reach more people. It's gonna win you those awards. So don't be afraid to, myth bust, and don't be afraid to be an advocate and an ally for accessibility.
Awesome. And last but not least, John.
Something I often talk about is proximity builds empathy. And as we are at home, on Zoom and not really going around interacting with different people of different abilities, I want to make myself, accessible and attainable for other people who may not have ever talked to somebody with a disability or somebody who is blind. And I'd love to just, open up those discussions, because again, it comes through these open dialogues, and then to hear each other's stories and to realize that we're much more, alike, and that now when you start to think about it, there's a human aspect about why are we making it accessible? Hey, I know Carrie, I know John, this will make it a much easier experience for them. Now you understand that it's not just about a compliance issue, but it's actually about people. So I'm more than happy to open dialogue and conversation with anybody who wants to reach out.
Absolutely. Action, awareness, lean in. Accessibility is an and, not an or, and proximity builds empathy. Wow. That it's been amazing to talk to all of you. I am thrilled that I was given this opportunity to moderate this panel. I've learned so much, and we're considered the experts. And no, I've learned so much from all of you in ways that we can continue to help us as individuals have an open environment in how we engage with others, but as well to make sure that we have work environments that are inclusive and accessible for all. So I thank each of you, Alan, Lori, Carrie, and John, for joining us today. It's been a blast. Our chats are saying that people have thoroughly enjoyed this. So thank you so much. Be sure to check out Ablr's new website that John talked about, abler360.com, for more information and to help with your company's accessibility and inclusion initiatives. At the end of the webinar, you're going to see a 2-question survey appear in your browser. We welcome your feedback and ask that you please take a minute to answer. And also, of course, you can find more diversity, equity, and inclusion, or we're going to have to change that, more inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility resources on our website, thediversitymovement.com, and including, you'll find registration for our next webinar, which will take place on October 20th, which will talk about multicultural marketing, which obviously as well will have something in there about accessibility. So thank you all for joining us. Kayla, you can go ahead with our 2 survey questions. And again, panelists, it's been a thrill to share this hour with each of you. Keep doing the amazing work that you're doing. I know our world is so much better for it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you,
Florence.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.